Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. You are attending the Supporting Students with Coping Resources and Dispositional Assessment Practices presentation. In alignment with the conference this year on going beyond the grade, we'll be exploring how we as instructors and professors and institutions overall can move beyond traditional grading by embedding mental health support and dispositional assessment into the student journey. Thinking about how we often focus heavily on academic output, papers, project performance, but what happens when we step back and look beyond the grade? What happens when we also consider a student's emotional bandwidth, their ability to cope, their growth as a reflective, resilient human being as they grow and go towards graduation and into their work life following their degree? Today, we'll talk about a framework, one grounded in practice, reflection, that can help support students not just academically, but personally and professionally. We'll explore strategies, tools, and mindsets that students can help shift students to embed those approaches into your own teaching, whether you're working with undergrad students or grad students or both. Thinking about success as not just performance, but about progress, and it's about adaptability, it's about self-awareness. That's what this session is about, refining what it means to support student development going beyond the grade. My name's Jessie Koltz. I was recently the program director and an assistant professor at Utah State University in the Masters of School Counseling program. And I'm excited to share both conceptual insights and a real world practice of what we've been doing from a grad program perspective over the last few years. So let's dive in. So what we're witnessing now, students are more overwhelmed, maybe more disengaged, struggling silently, especially in grad programs, maybe even in really intensive undergrad programs. Students often carry maybe a full-time job, caregiving roles, sometimes silent burden of mental health challenges. And grading alone doesn't capture that. Strict deadlines without context don't help students develop. Zero flexibility sends a message that output matters more than development. So how do we balance expectations while still being human and person-centered? Well, we'll talk about that today. We're going to look at two critical areas that go beyond traditional grading, looking at mental health, coping, and self-care resources, and looking at dispositional assessment specifically from a graduate program perspective, where the goal is to promote a holistic student development. So this session centers on these two essential but often underrepresented areas of student development. So that integration of mental health, coping, and self-care is definitely something we want to highlight, and knowing that these are foundational for academic confidence and emotional regulation is essential. And then what is the role of dispositional assessment? How can we evaluate students who are becoming professionals, not just about what they know, but who they are, how they are, and then putting these together to really drive that holistic development, especially embedded into an academic structure. So rethinking rigor and success, starting to think about how can we reframe what success looks like. Students are not just brains on sticks, right? They are whole people managing all of these multiple complexities in their lives. So work, family, health challenges, mental health issues. Traditional assessment systems reward performance, but we need to ask ourselves, do they reflect learning? Do they reflect supporting resilience? Do they reflect who that person is humanistically and to the core to support where they're personally at? So what we'll dive into are the challenges that this session can challenge us, sorry, to see rigor not just as an output, but also in being adaptive, looking at self-awareness, looking at that growth mindset of the students that we work with. These are all real skills that students will take with them into the workforce. So why go beyond traditional grades? The conference theme, Beyond the Grade, is a powerful call to shift away from that culture dominated by those high stakes tests. Um, Being encouraged to pursue continuous, authentic, and creative assessments that reveal more about the learner, their mindset, growth, and values is what we're trying to look at here. Grades alone don't reflect growth or resilience. Student well-being directly impacts academic confidence, and supporting coping and assessing dispositions aligns directly with this. Looking at holistic approaches to really equip students for real-world challenges can foster deeper learning, creativity, and professional readiness, going far beyond what a gradebook can capture. So why do dispositions matter, and what are they? Dispositions can be assessed in different ways through different programs that you're at. I think just really thinking of grades, right? They tell us something, but not everything. As instructors, we do know some of our most successful graduates aren't always A students. Why? Because the true measure of success often lies in dispositions, things like persistence, flexibility, integrity, the ability to self-assess. These traits influence how students show up in group work, how they handle feedback, how they recover from failure or from feedback that maybe isn't the most positive. And yet we rarely make them visible or accessible in our programs, and that's the gap that we're trying to close. So why go beyond grades? As we mentioned, grades alone don't capture professional readiness. Traditional assessment measures what students know or do. Dispositional assessment, on the other hand, helps see who they are and who they're becoming. Mental and emotional well-being impacts performance, and the ability to reflect on progress and adjust is essential to mental health and well-being for students. Dispositions reflect long-term professional success, and being self-aware and having that willingness to receive and integrate feedback will really help support professional longevity and success in the workplace later on. Moving away from that high stakes testing culture can really support qualities that matter most when students are entering those helping professions. Looking at embracing authentic, continuous assessment practices and dispositional evaluation and self-care, promoting deeper learning, and especially emotional regulation, encouraging creativity, self-awareness, and professional readiness. Thinking about students with wanting a 4.0 GPA might indicate that mastery of that content, but not necessarily that emotional resilience that we're looking for, or interpersonal skills that we're looking to see in group work, or even readiness for real world work pressures. When students are struggling mentally, emotionally, academically, their performance can then collapse. And a more holistic model could include integrating these soft skills and really supporting them to look at their interpersonal skills, their self-awareness, their emotional regulation to make them more effective professionally. So part of supporting dispositional growth is ensuring students have coping resources, especially in high demand, emotionally intensive programs. So normalizing access to mental health and peer support should be one of those first identifiers, or there's those first conversations really in any program, in any area, to have that students access or know where to access mental health supports or peer supports along the way. Reducing stress, anxiety, and burnout through intentional structures, so such as doing some, writing, reflections, journaling, deep breathing, getting ready for, bigger, more stressful areas, and even embedding wellness into the educational experience could be really supportive for students. Other ideas could be class check-ins, having office hours framed as mentorship, having reflective assignments, as I mentioned just previously, on how students are managing their stress or their setbacks, looking at how are they coping, how are they regulating their needs. even being transparent as an instructor about your own process as a professional. When we normalize our stress and offer supportive strategies, students start seeing challenges as a space for development, not as defeat. So students need more than this academic scaffolding. They need emotional scaffolding too. And I know that we are all not mental health practitioners or trained in that realm, but we all undergo stressful situations. We have our own self-care and coping resources, but normalizing the use of mental health services or creating peer support systems, talking about mindfulness, talking about how you are coping or how others might be coping, embedding wellness reflection into academic courses. They don't have to be extracurricular assignments or extracurricular things. They are essential practices that boost learning, that reduce stress, and that strengthen that retention of students in programs. So I'll share an example from the graduate program that I was a part of these last 4 years. Having a transparent framework for how we assess dispositions in our program and courses was really the idea that we were going for. Having a structured support system and expectations throughout the program, bringing it in through even the student handbook, laying out what the dispositional assessment is when students are assessed, and I'll talk about this in a few future slides here. Integrating mental health and dispositional development throughout the way. So as counselors, that's what our grad program teaches our students to be, especially specifically in the school setting. We need a healthy work-life balance and the ability to really support your own mental wellness while taking care or supporting other people's mental health too. The framework that I'll chat about with you all in this presentation is called the Professional Disposition Competency Assessment Revised Framework by Drs. Gardner and Freeman. And I'll share a little bit about what that is and how that was developed. And like I mentioned, integrating self-care and dispositional growth throughout our counseling program is what I'll share a bit about. And having those regular checkpoints to assess students and give them feedback through formative assessment is what we've integrated and what is really intended through the dispositional assessment that was developed by these two academic professionals. And looking at that emphasis on student reflection and co-ownership of the process has been something that we've truly integrated throughout our program at Utah State, where students receive a clear outline of what's being assessed dispositionally. So that receptiveness to feedback, flexibility, engagement, and then examples of how these qualities appear in practice, ongoing feedback tied to these areas, and then opportunities to reflect and respond. So this all removes that mystery. It shows students that we're not assessing you as a person, we're assessing how you're showing up in the learning space, specifically, integrating with the world and other humans, helping them grow from there. Our relationship as a counselor is human-centered. We work and support systems in all ways, whether it's from an individual student perspective to a community or school-based system. And thinking about, this case study in this program, intentionally integrating self-care and professional disposition checkpoint across the student journey, it helps students really reflect on what are they working on, what are their personal goals, not getting lost in just all of the academic expectations, but looking into those early expectations around professionalism, ethics, self-awareness, engaging in reflection, engaging in mentoring, whether it's from peers or supervisors at the university or in the community school setting, and then having those structured conversations around their development, not just about fixing problems, but building on that readiness professionally. So the PDCAR, the Professional Disposition Competency Assessment, is a systemic assessment process created by Drs. Curtis Gardner and Brenda Freeman. It's been used in our program in the school counseling education program to evaluate professional dispositions essential for counselor development. It promotes ethical, professional, and personal development in future counselors, aligned with the American Counseling Association, the American School Counseling Association, and Utah School Counseling Association standards. We have really built a feedback loop where students receive feedback on academic and dispositional areas to reflect, respond to their own insights, and have this co-assessment model with their supervisors and themselves to increase student buy-in, to help connect feedback to action, and then really promote over time students beginning to internalize that professional disposition or dispositions, not just perform them. So it's one of the clearest examples of moving beyond the grade because the focus shifts from development to development and process. So in the program, we use a gate system and 4 key checkpoints to really assess dispositions of all the students in the program. So at orientation, students actually have time to self-assess and set intentions based on the dispositions that we assess, and I'll share those in the next slide here. The second gate, looking at their progress throughout their first year of their program, receiving formative feedback and a plan for growth from faculty, where we have that sit down, review, and support those students that maybe are concerned or those that are doing really well. And then the third area is looking at their second year of the program during practicum. So they have a practicum that is site-based at a K-12 setting, and they are engaged with students. They receive formative feedback from their real-world performance and reflection on their assessment with their site supervisor and their secondary faculty supervisor twice during that one semester. So they can set goals on what they would like to, improve on, especially as they get to the last year of the program, which kind of brings to that fourth area, program exit with holistic review. The final review evaluates growth across the journey at the middle and end points of their internship. The checkpoints aren't punitive, they're just spaces for mentorship, a celebration of development, and then goal setting to support future development. So the dispositions assessed via the PDCAR are these 9 here, and consciousness, coping and self-care, openness, cooperativeness, moral reasoning, interpersonal skills, cultural sensitivity, self-awareness, and emotional stability are assessed and defined as being where they need to be, or below or above where they need to be in these areas. And I'm happy to share the resource of the articles that Gardner and Freeman have developed over time of the development of this dispositional assessment. It's all found, on the web. So you're welcome to search the PDCAR. It is specific to counseling programs, but that doesn't mean it could be, looked at for other types of programs either, because all of these dispositions are pretty generic to professionalism in the workplace. So thinking of disposition-based mentorship, using these formative assessments to foster a growth mindset. Having formative assessment of these disposition invites that mentorship to talk about what is encouraged, what is needed for students. Instead of waiting for students to fail a behavioral standard, we create a culture where students can say, here's what I'm struggling with, please help me grow, and having that voice in those assessments. Encouraging open discussion on strengths and growth areas, and having those supportive conversations to help students build emotional intelligence and professional identity. So this is the kind of development that grades alone can't capture, and it really creates that space for all parties, students, professor, instructor, supervisor, to really have these conversations. There is, area for incident reporting as ongoing feedback. So outside of the formal checkpoints, the program supports students through ongoing formative feedback, but faculty can submit incident reports relating to a color-coded concern scale built into and integrated into this PDCAR system, not to punish, but to initiate support. So it's not just for discipline, it's for learning and redirections, for concerns outside scheduled gates, and to support students, especially if there's an ethical dilemma or ethical concern that is going on throughout the program with the student. And they're color-coded that initiate timely mentorship. So ratings from green to red severity and noted and talked about as, a faculty, as a program. And it triggers faculty review more intensively to support planning, to support remediation. And it really models real-world professional accountability, looking at the growth as being monitored, supported, and coached. So having student engagement and transparency throughout this process is key. Students engage in that self-assessment from the beginning of the program. They understand the rubric that's assessed for these dispositions. Then they see their developmental journey as a shared responsibility. This clearly reduces anxiety. The clarity of it can reduce anxiety, and then build that trust with the program, with the instructors and the students, which is especially important for students from historically marginalized or high stress backgrounds. So students can reflect and self-assess at each stage. Those clear rubrics really point out clear expectations and reduce anxiety. And then that mentorship culture helps build trust and continuous development. So outcomes for students and instructors are great. Students report feeling more invested in their own growth, better equipped to give and receive feedback, having less anxiety about failure, being more connected to their instructors, to their program. And when students feel that they're being supported and not judged, they take more ownership of their development. Instructors, this work and this process can reduce late semester panic. Having those difficult conversations be easier to go off of a rubric and a process, a plan to help support that foundation for mentorship. It helps to differentiate between a student who's struggling and who is disengaged. And it also aligns with our ethical obligation to prepare students for more than just tests and projects, where we're preparing them for people work, whatever field that they enter. So identifying those students along the way throughout this process with low self-care ratings, referring them to resources is an essential piece along the way. Bridging academic and personal development is what we are really trying to do throughout this process, and then creating a culture of growth and not punishment. So some takeaways as we close, I want to return to that theme of beyond the grade. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't mean that we're going to ignore academic standards, right? We're not going to just not take into account academic standards, but it means that we can expand on what we value. So helping students become not just competent, but resilient, reflective, relational. Whether you teach in counseling, engineering, education, business, these practices are adaptable, and you can start small. Maybe it's a reflective assignment, maybe it's a dispositional feedback point, maybe it's one conversation about coping strategies. Think of what you might want to integrate into your course this semester or this year, because ultimately we're not just building scholars, we're building people, we're building our community, and it begins with how we assess what matters. So looking at mental health and dispositions, being teachable, being accessible. The PDCAR is one structure that has been developed over time and looked at relating to a counseling program and counseling gateway perspective. Having a holistic program or holistic process to equip students for professional success is essential. And looking at mental health and dispositions together can really, bring out critical readiness for students as they graduate, as they move towards their world of work. Being formative and authentic through your assessments can help empower growth. And then looking beyond the grade requires investment to the whole student, not just grading alone. So when we support mental health and assess dispositions, we build capacity, not just performance. Grades should not be the ceiling of assessment, but the floor. So the beyond the grade approach means we're preparing the whole resilient, self-aware professional. Thanks so much for your time today. And if you would want to connect, I'd love to connect with you or answer any questions or share any resources. Please feel free to reach out. My email is here on the slide. My last name, koltz.jessica@gmail.com. Thanks so much.